Now we're on to the last 5 questions of the multiple choice section, starting with question 11. Which of the following combinations of causes and consequences in the market for good X is correct? A government subsidy is given to firms producing X. This government subsidy would make production of this good cheaper for firms. So this would cause the supply curve for firms to shift outwards because they'll be willing to supply more because they'll get a subsidy. So it decreases the cost of production. The consequence for this says that there is a movement down the supply curve. This is not the case. A movement down the supply curve would be a decrease in price, not a subsidy. A subsidy would always cause a shift outwards. So that therefore A is wrong. B, the price of good X decreases. If the price of good X decreases, and the consequence is asking about the demand curve, then we would see a movement along the demand curve. However, it's saying that the demand curve for X will shift to the right, which is not the case. So therefore, B is also wrong. C, the price of a substitute for X increases. If the price of a substitute for X increases, as they are substitutes, individuals can easily substitute one good for another one. So if the price of one increases, the demand curve for good X will shift to the right because it becomes more attractive because it's relatively cheaper. Whereas it says that the demand curve shifts to the left, so this is wrong. Therefore, it must be D. D, the wage paid to workers producing X falls. If the wage paid to workers falls, it means that the cost of production for the firm falls. It's cheaper to produce the good. That means that the firms will be willing to supply this good, more of this good, for a given price, which means that the supply curve will shift to the right. So the answer to question 11 is D. Now we can look at question 12. In the diagram below, demand increases from D to D1. Which error represents the increase in producer surplus? So when we were initially at our equilibrium, we were at point T, where we had the demand curve D and S. Producer surplus is the additional amount of money that producers receive from selling the good. This is represented in the original equilibrium at point T by the area Y, T, X, which is shown with the yellow triangle. When demand increases, shifts outwards, moves from D to D1, the equilibrium moves from T to U. This is met by an increase in quantity from W to X, or W to V, and an increase in price from Y to Z. This results in the producer surplus increasing. The producer surplus in our second equilibrium at point U is ZUX. The difference in consumer surplus is the orange triangle minus the yellow triangle, which comes out to the green shape, which is area ZUTY, which is also YZUT, which is answer D. Now we can move on to question 13. Question 13 asks, a company operates a bus and tram service in a city. If the board of directors has decided to increase the price of bus fares and leave tram fares unchanged, which of the following diagrams below would show the effect of the market for travel in the city? We would imagine that buses and trams are substitutes, meaning that individuals are not too fussed whether they get a bus somewhere or a tram somewhere. They will decide on the price. So here we have two demand curves for bus and tram services. The bus service, we'll assume that it starts at P1, and supply here will be perfectly elastic, meaning that they'll supply any amount that is demanded at this price, P1. This leads to a quantity of Q1 being demanded of bus services. They then raise the price from P1 to P2, so supply moves up. and this causes a decrease in the quantity consumed of buses. Now buses are more expensive, so it means that individuals are going to choose alternative transports. They may choose to walk, or they may choose to get the tram, which is another mode of transport offered by this company. As they're moving to choose to demand the tram service, the demand curve for the tram will shift outwards. This means that the answer for this question is C, because we've got D and D1, which is shifted outwards. Question 14 has an output table and a cost of production table. It's asked, what is the average variable cost when 400 units are produced? With this, we need to be very careful that we're looking for the variable cost, because we know that total costs, which is shown, are fixed costs and variable costs added together. The way we can find the fixed costs is by looking at what the cost of production are when an output level is 0. When we look at 0, we see that the fixed costs are 17,500. So as we know that total costs are fixed costs plus variable costs, we can rearrange that formula to get variable costs equals total costs minus fixed costs. So our total costs when we're producing 400 units is 53,800, and our fixed cost, like I've said, is 17,500. So we do 53,800 minus 17,500, which gives us 36,300. This gives us the total variable cost, and in order to work out the average variable cost, we divide this figure by the total output, or the output that we are producing, which is 400. So we do 36,300 divided by 400, which gives us an average variable cost of £90.75, which is answer C. So now we have the final question for this multiple choice section. It asks, if a government decides to provide healthcare free at the point of delivery, then A, the demand for healthcare will be perfectly elastic. B, healthcare will become non-rival. C, some form of rationing will have to be used in the allocation of healthcare. D, there will be no opportunity cost involved in the supply of healthcare. So we are looking at the government providing healthcare. So the government is supplying healthcare. Nothing is changing the demand curve here. So that means that A must be wrong. Also, we are not changing the type of good for healthcare. It will still be rivalrous and excludable. So we have our initial demand curve before, but we assume that our government has a fixed budget for this, and they can supply the supply curve that's labelled S of healthcare. It's perfectly inelastic because they only have a certain budget for this. However, we are making healthcare free. This means that individuals will actually choose to demand a greater amount than should be demanded in the market, and this means that a certain amount of demand, which is indicated by the blue arrow at the bottom, will need to be rationed. So that means that the answer for this question will be C. Some form of rationing will have to be used in the allocation of healthcare. This is because individuals demand a greater amount when it's free compared to if market forces determined a price, which would then ration and allocate and decrease the demand for this good. So the answer to this question is C, and that ends the multiple choice section.